It was an ordinary morning in David's isolated cabin until the silence shattered. A cold wind howled through the trees, but that wasn't what made David's pulse race. It was the sight of something impossible unfolding outside his window. Two tiny bear cubs, no more than a few months old, were huddling together on the porch, trembling in the harsh winter cold. But it wasn't just them that caught David's attention. It was the enormous mother bear standing motionless behind them. Her eyes were fixed on the cubs, watching them with an unsettling stillness. Her presence was imposing, her massive frame casting a shadow over the porch, yet she remained as still as a stone statue. David's heart pounded in his chest. He had spent years in these woods encountering all sorts of wild animals, but this was different. The cubs were so young, vulnerable, and alone. But why hadn't the mother bear moved? Why was she just standing there, unblinking? David's mind raced, running through every scenario he could imagine. A bear with cubs was one of the most dangerous animals in the wild, and yet here she was, almost frozen in time. She wasn't acting aggressively. In fact, she wasn't acting at all. He watched her closely, his eyes narrowing as he saw something strange. The bear seemed conflicted, torn between instinct and something else, something softer, perhaps even trusting. David couldn't put it into words, but it was as if the bear was waiting for something. Was it waiting for him to make a move? To open the door? His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the handle. The thought of opening the door, of inviting a wild animal into his home, was terrifying. He'd read the stories. Wild animals, especially mothers, could become aggressive if they felt cornered. But this wasn't a typical situation. The cubs needed help. The bear had made no move, no gesture of aggression. In fact, the only thing she seemed to be doing was waiting. David had lived his life surrounded by wild creatures, but he'd never felt a pull like this before. A part of him wanted to help the cubs, protect them from the cold that was beginning to bite through the walls of the cabin. Another part of him screamed for caution, for safety. What if this was a trap? What if the bear was setting him up, waiting for him to make the wrong move? The silence between them grew thicker, heavier. The cubs' small, innocent faces stared up at the door, their wide eyes locked on him, almost as if they were asking for help. Their tiny bodies quivered in the cold, the weight of the winter air pressing against them. David couldn't shake the thought that if he didn't act now, the cubs might not survive. It wasn't just a decision about survival. It was a choice about trust. The bear was giving him a chance to show mercy, to choose to act against the instinct of fear. He had opened doors for all kinds of creatures before, but never like this. Never for something so wild, so untamed. David's breath fogged up the window, but he didn't wipe it away. He stared at the scene before him, his heart racing faster. The bear was still, but her eyes, those eyes, kept searching his. Could she sense that he was hesitating? Could she feel the inner battle within him? What if opening the door was the wrong choice? What if it led to chaos, to danger? The fear was real, but the pull to help was stronger. David made up his mind. His hand reached for the door handle, and he slowly turned it. The decision was made. The bear's future, the cub's future, was now in his hands. David stood at the door, his hand on the knob, his mind racing. The tension outside was almost suffocating, and the cold air seeping through the cracks in the cabin door did nothing to calm his nerves. He knew he was at a crossroads, a moment in time that could change everything. He glanced back at the bear through the window. The giant animal hadn't moved, its piercing eyes still fixed on the cubs. The moment felt surreal. Here he was, a seasoned outdoorsman, staring at a wild creature, one that could turn deadly in an instant. Yet something in its stance made David hesitate. There was no aggression, no growl, no sign that the bear intended to charge. It seemed lost, almost like it was waiting for something. His breath fogged up the window, and as he wiped it away, he saw the cubs inch closer to the door. They were so young, barely able to stand on their own, let alone survive the brutal conditions outside. David's heart softened at the sight. The cubs needed warmth, protection, and their mother, despite her formidable size and power, couldn't offer them much in the harsh winter cold. David's hand tightened on the door handle. He knew that opening the door could be risky. A bear with cubs was unpredictable, and there was always the possibility that the mother would become defensive and attack. But there was a part of David, deep inside, that couldn't stand by and do nothing. He had seen too many wild animals in distress, and he knew what it meant to intervene, to help, when life hung in the balance. The moment stretched on. David could hear the soft sounds of the cubs sniffing around outside, their tiny noses pressing against the door, as if searching for the warmth that only the inside of the cabin could offer. But what if he was wrong? What if this was a trap? The bear could strike in an instant, and David had no guarantee that he could protect himself, let alone the cubs. The fear was real, but so was the pull to help. His mind flashed back to his days in the Forest Service, to all the times he had been in similar situations, weighing the risks against the potential good that could come from an action. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the cubs, the helpless creatures who had no one else to turn to. David took a deep breath and made his choice. With a swift motion, he turned the handle and opened the door. The cold air rushed in, hitting him with the sharp sting of winter, but he didn't flinch. He stepped back, watching carefully, waiting for any reaction from the bear. For a long moment, nothing happened. The bear did not charge. Instead, it stood there, its gaze never leaving the cabin. The cubs, too, paused. They looked up at David, and for the first time, there was a flicker of recognition in their eyes. David took another step forward, speaking softly, trying to reassure them, trying to reassure himself. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." As he spoke, the bear finally moved. Slowly, cautiously, it approached the door. David's heart pounded in his chest. Was it coming to attack? Or was it, could it be, trusting him? The mother bear took a few slow, deliberate steps forward, stopping just a few feet from the threshold. She stood there looking at David with her intense, knowing eyes. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. There was no growl, no threat, just an eerie silence hanging in the air. David's fingers trembled as he reached down to close the door, but he didn't. Instead, he waited. The bear wasn't hostile. It was waiting for something, perhaps a signal or maybe just the reassurance that David wasn't a threat. David stood there, heart in his throat, uncertain of what would happen next. The cubs still remained at the door, their tiny paws now resting just inches from him. The warmth inside the cabin beckoned, but would the bear allow them to enter? David held his breath as the door creaked open. The cold air rushed in, but he didn't flinch. He stood still, his gaze locked on the mother bear, who had made no move, no growl, no sign of aggression. The cubs, now close to the threshold, peered inside with curiosity, their tiny paws pressing against the floorboards. The moment was surreal. Here he was, face to face with one of nature's most powerful creatures, and yet there was no hostility. The bear's eyes, dark and knowing, watched him intently, but there was no anger, no threat. She stood in the doorway, her massive form filling the space. The silence between them was thick with something unspoken, something deeper than mere survival. David hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He had always known the wild to be unpredictable, but this was different. The bear wasn't just a predator, she was a mother, and somehow, in this strange moment, she was trusting him. The trust that she had placed in him hung heavy in the air. He glanced down at the cubs, still trembling in the cold, their small faces illuminated by the soft light from inside the cabin. They were innocent, vulnerable. They were creatures of the forest. Yet here they were, on the cusp of a new chapter, one that depended entirely on David's decision. The bear took a slow step forward, her heavy paws patting softly against the wood floor. David stepped back, giving her space, but he didn't shut the door. He wanted to protect the cubs. He wanted to keep them safe, not just from the cold, but from the dangers of the wild. And somehow opening the door hadn't been just an act of survival. It had been an act of trust. Without a sound, the bear walked inside, the cubs following her in close succession. The warmth of the cabin seemed to comfort them, and David's eyes followed them as they huddled near the fireplace. For a moment, everything was still, silent save for the soft crackle of the fire. David leaned against the doorframe, watching in awe as the mother bear curled up near her cubs. They were safe now. The impossible had happened. He had opened the door, and in doing so, he had not only given them shelter, but had formed a bond, one that transcended the wild and the human world. He had made the right choice.